Next witness, David Kopel, is the Research Director for the Independence Institute, as well as an Associate Policy Analyst for the Cato Institute, and Adjunct Professor of Advanced Constitutional Law at Denver University's Strum College of Law. Did I get that all correct? Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Leahy and Senator Grassley. I think to continue the themes that Captain Kelly has so eloquently spoken about, gun rights and gun control don't have to be culture war enemies. Properly conceived, they can work together and reinforce each other. It's important to recognize that the Second Amendment is not absolute any more than the First Amendment is. It certainly has an absolute core that can't be violated under any circumstances, but that doesn't prohibit all firearms controls.
Excuse me, and this won't come out of your time.
Okay.
All of the statements will be put in the record in full so we can keep close to the time. Go ahead.
Thank you. I will keep very close to the time. And likewise, gun controls don't violate the Second Amendment if they are constructed so they don't violate the rights of law-abiding citizens, and they actually do something constructive, significant, and effective to protect law-abiding citizens. Captain Kelly talked about the matrix of failure. 20 years ago, I testified before this committee, some of the senators are still here, about one thing that turned out to be part of that matrix of failure, and that was the ban on so-called assault weapons. I warned during that testimony then that it was based not on the function of guns or how fast they fired or how powerful they were, but on superficial, cosmetic characteristics and accessories. As part of the compromise that eventually led to that bill being mistakenly passed by Congress, the bill had a 10-year sunset in it and a requirement that the Department of Justice supervise a study of the effectiveness of that law. That study was, the people to carry out that study were chosen by Attorney General Reno's Department of Justice. They did several interim studies and then a final study, and they concluded that the law had done nothing. It had not saved lives. It had not reduced the number of bullets that were fired in crimes. It had been a failure. It had, to some minor degree, switched the types of guns that were used in crimes. So you had a gun with one name instead of another name, but it didn't reduce crime overall. And indeed, it was a dangerous bill in the sense that so much political attention was distracted by the focus on this that it took public attention away from debate on measures that might have been more constructive and life-saving. Today, police and law-abiding citizens choose semi-automatic handguns and rifles such as the AR-15 for the same reason. They are often the best choice for the lawful defense of self and others. To assert that such firearms and their standard capacity factory magazines are only meant for mass murder is truly to libel law-abiding citizens and the many law enforcement officers who choose these guns not for hunting, not for collecting, but for the purpose for which police officers always carry firearms, for the lawful defense of self and others. Great Britain shows the perils of mass gun confiscation that some people have proposed. It has a higher violent crime rate than the United States, and especially high rate of home invasion burglaries. Congress has repeatedly outlawed gun registration because of the accurate recognition that in other countries and in the United States, in New York City, gun registration has been used as a tool for confiscation. These 1941, 1986, and 1993 congressional statutes are one way that gun rights can be protected against future abuses. Unfortunately, the bills about universal background checks that have been proposed in recent Congresses with the support of Mayor New York City Michael Bloomberg have often had provisions in them for gun registration and for many other violations of the civil liberties of law-abiding persons, such as allowing gun bans for people who were accused but acquitted of drug crimes. Universal background checks should be available. It was a wise move by President Obama in his January 16th press conference to begin changes in federal regulations and their interpretation to allow private sellers to access the background check system via a federally licensed firearms dealer. Many people will choose to take advantage of that, and I commend them. But mandating universal checks can only be enforceable if there is universal gun registration. And we know that universal gun registration in every country in the world where it's existed has been a serious peril to gun ownership. Universal gun registration was imposed by Canada in 1995 and was later repealed in 2012 by the Canadian Parliament because it was such a fiasco. If we want to save lives right now, not with constructive reforms that might do some good in the future, there is only one thing that will stop the next copycat killer, and that is lawful armed self-defense in the schools, not only by armed guards, but also by teachers. Utah provides the successful model. There, a teacher who has a permit to carry after a background check and a safety training class everywhere else in the state is not prohibited from carrying at the schools. Gun prohibition lobbies come up with all kinds of fantastic scenarios about what the harms that these would cause, and teachers will shoot each other or threaten students, or the students will steal the guns. But we've had this policy in practice in Utah for many years, and we've never had a single problem. And quite notably, we've never had an attack on a Utah school. If we want to save lives, armed defense in the schools is the immediate and best choice, while other constructive solutions may take longer to have an effect. Thank you.
Professor Kopel, was the 1994 assault weapons ban a sensible and effective means of reducing gun violence? And secondly, is there any reason to reenact a more extensive assault weapons ban?
Sorry. Based on the Department of Justice study, the answer was no, that it was something that was tried with great sincerity. A lot of people thought it would be a good idea, but it didn't seem to save any lives that the researchers could find. The revised law is just more of the same, but it suffers from the same fundamental problem. You can have a 1994 law that lists some guns by name and a 2013 law that lists more guns by name, but the very fact that you're banning guns by name, that's just an example of how the law doesn't address the gun's firepower or their rate of fire. It's simply, if there's something that makes these guns more dangerous, then legislation ought to be able to describe it in neutral terms. So all these names, I think, are a sign of exactly what's wrong with the bill. Now, the present bill, like its 1994 predecessor, also has outlaws things based on various features. But again, these aren't things that have to do with the internal mechanics of the gun, how fast it fires, or how powerful the bullets are. They're things like whether a rifle has a forward grip. Well, a forward grip on a rifle helps the user stabilize it and make the gun more accurate, so that if you're deer hunting, the second shot is almost as accurate as the first, or if you're target shooting, or more importantly, most importantly, if you're engaged in lawful self-defense. And that's why you see guns like the AR-15 with their standard factory-issued 30-round magazines in police cars all over the country, because they make the gun more accurate for the core purpose of the Second Amendment, which is lawful self-defense.
Professor Kopel, you authored an article in Wall Street Journal last month entitled Guns, Mental Illness, Newtown. And I would also like to have that included in the record. Is there evidence that mental illness and changes to civil commitment laws play a part in mass shootings? And what can we do to keep guns away from mentally ill, consistent with our Second Amendment?
Well, certainly they play quite a major role in homicides in general. Probably according to the Department of Justice research, about 1/6 of the people in state prisons for homicide are mentally ill. If you look at these mass murders where suicidal people try to end their lives in the most infamous way possible, in Tucson, at Virginia Tech, Newtown, Aurora, you have a very strong threat of mental illness running through that. And certainly improving the background, the data about mental health adjudications, not just a psychiatrist's recommendation or something like that, but what due process and the Constitution require, which is an adjudication, a fair decision by a neutral decision maker. Getting those into the background check system is something that Congress started working on after Virginia Tech, and there's more progress to be made. But it's not just a matter of checks. It's even if you have the most ideal check system in the world, at the least, even if and you imagine these criminals, violently insane criminals, could never get a gun anywhere else. You know, Adam Lanza at Newtown didn't have background checks. He stole the guns after murdering his mother. So the long-term solution is not just about background checks. It's about why are these people on the streets in the first place. All of these killers I've just mentioned could have been civilly committed under the civil commitment laws we had several decades ago. Those laws were changed sometimes because they were sometimes abused, but I think we can move back to a more sensible position that strongly protects the due process rights of people against involuntary commitment, but also gets dangerous people off the streets. And that will cost money at the state level, but it's money that will be greatly saved in the long term through reduced incarceration costs for crimes.
This has been a Sunfish production.